Hello everybody, the next plane off the pile is a Stanley number 20.5 circular plane. Let's take a look at it. The book value of a Stanley 20.5 is $150 to $300. Stanley made this plane from 1902 to 1917. The sole on this plane is 9.5 inches long and the iron is 1 3/4 inches wide. The only difference between this plane and the Stanley number 20 is this one's Japan and the 20 was nickel plated. The flexible steel sole of this plane allows you to plane convex and concave surfaces that are 20 inches long or longer. The number 20 and the number 20.5 are probably the best circular planes that Stanley made. They're more sturdy than the number 13 and the number 113. It's time to break her down. And there she is, completely broken down. Overall the parts look good. I see a lot of surface rust that should clean off. Japanning is at least 90 to 95% with some missing bits here and there. First thing I'm going to do is use the simple green and a toothbrush in my deep sink to clean up the frog, the body, and the depth adjustment nut, all the Japan parts. With the parts cleaned up nice, it's time to move on to the machine surfaces. I'll be cleaning the top and underside of the frog. On the underside you've got 3 surfaces right here that are machined. The machine surfaces on the depth adjustment knob and the underside of the frog frame. There's just a little bit of surface rust on these, so I'm going to try going with the sanding stick and the sponge first and see if I don't have to use something as aggressive as the lapping station. While I'm working on the frog, I'm going to go ahead and do the lateral adjustment lever too. The bottom of the frog frame has a flat surface and a slightly angled surface. Best place to get that over here in my lapping station. I'm going to finish those surfaces with the sanding sponge and the steel wool. The hand wire brushes get down into the dovetail. And the last thing I do is go over it with the 4/0 steel wool. Those machine surfaces cleaned up nice. And the next thing I did was the receiver where the depth adjustment knob goes. And a gun cleaning bore brush is the best thing to use to clean up these 2 holes right here. The one where the threads go through that knob and the threads go through the body. What's nice about these bore brushes is you can find several different sizes, buy a few of each of them, and that way when you come up with a job like this to do, it's easily done. Next is to clean up the threads on the sole plate adjustment and your depth adjustment. But first I taped off the Japanning at the base of the thread so it doesn't get messed up. Next step is to lightly steel wool the Japan parts with some 4/0 steel wool. Primary focus is going to be removing the surface rust where the Japanning is missing. And all the Japan parts cleaned up really nice. I'm not going to do any touch up to them. And it's on to the flexible sole where I'm going to use my scraper, a sanding sponge, wire brush, and steel wool. My scrapers do a great job removing surface rust and flat surfaces. And right there immediately, look at that, what a difference. The top side cleaned up really nice with just the scraper. I'm going to flip it over and do the bottom. So the scraper did a fine job, look at that. I flipped it over so you can get a look at the underside. I'm going to do these ends right here on my wire wheel. Both ends cleaned up really nice. And then I took my sanding stick and I cleaned up the throat right there, inside and out. Now I'm going to use a sanding block with 150 grit, the sanding sponge, and steel wool to clean up both this side and the bottom side of the plate. Using the sanding block, I got to have the nose end down. Working with the original machine marks, evening up the patina. And with the top side done, I'm going to take the 150 grit around this outside edge of the sole. And all that's left is the bottom. I'm going to finish it up with my sanding sponge and some steel wool. The flexible steel sole cleaned up really nice. There's the top side and there's a look at the bottom side. Next is the lever cap. I'm going to use my sandblaster on the bottom side and I'm going to scrape the top of my scraper and then use the sanding sponge and steel wool, see how it looks. This looks like it's just got surface rust, and the nickel plating appears to still be there, which is a very rare thing. With only about 15 seconds of blasting, it's a night and day difference. Look at that. I'm going to use 150 grit on the spring plate. I followed up the 150 with 1000 grit paper, and that's done. Now I'm going to do the rest of the underside on my wire wheel. And that did a fine job. The dirty oil is going to make it look older again when I apply it. And I'm thinking the surface rust on the top side will clean up with a sanding sponge and some 1000 grit paper. The sanding sponge and 1000 grit paper did a fine job. And it's onto the iron and the iron cap, and the first thing I'm going to do is scrape them with my scraper. Nice low angle, scrape the same direction of the original tooling. The back side of the lever cap has bluing, so the only thing I'm going to do is lightly use the sanding sponge on it, just like that, and then go over it with some 3 or 4/0 steel wool, either one, doesn't matter. I'm going to do the edges of the iron and the iron cap. I can use my rubber sanding block, or I can do it over on my lapping station. And the slots and the iron cap get cleaned with rolled up sandpaper and my sandpaper on a stick. Most of the iron and the iron cap is looking shiny and new without doing anything to it. Been well taken care of over the years. I'm going to return the whole thing that way if I can, using 150 grit on the sanding block. If these were rustier, I would probably go over and do this on my lapping station. The sanding block worked great. I'm going to finish them up with another sanding block with 1000 grit. And that's it for the iron cap. They both cleaned up really nice. Here's the back side, and here's a look at the front side. And now I'll take the iron to the lapping station and flatten the back side. I want the leading 3/4 of an inch or so to be perfectly flat. I'll run this iron back and forth several times and take a look, see what it looks like. Oh, look at that. Not a lot of work to do there. It's almost flat already. The old iron flattened out really nice. I'm going to repeat the same process. I'm going to use 1000, 3005, and 7000 grit paper. And with the backside nicely flattened, I used a fine tip Sharpie to draw a straight line for square. With the iron secured firmly in my General number 810 blade sharpener, it's nice long strokes. 150 grit paper on my lapping station. Here's a look at the back side of the iron and a look at the front side. She's razor sharp. And now it's time to break out the dirty old rag. The oil on that rag is Howard feed and wax. Everything gets coated with the dirty oil, and where my rag doesn't reach, I break out the Q-tips. The dirty oil is applied and those things are looking really good. And now it's on to the small parts. The things I'm going to use is that dental pick, a cut off piece of sanding sponge, and multiple layers of folded up sandpaper, 150 grit. I like to use the dental pick first, and I finish the slots with some tight fitting sandpaper. Next, I'm going to use that old cut off piece of sanding sponge to make this depth adjustment knob go from this to this. And now all of the small parts go over to my wire wheel. And now it's time to give the small parts a coat of rem oil. I like using the rem oil because it not only lubricates but it slightly darkens the metal, giving it an aged look. And now with all the parts clean and oiled, it's time to wipe the oil off and give everything a good coating of paste wax, all but the small parts. And here's one last look at all the cleaned up and waxed parts. I think this thing's going to be beautiful when she gets back together. And there she is, all cleaned up. What a beautiful old plane. I don't think I can complain about how she looks now. I test drove a 113 a few months ago after cleaning it up. Now I get the chance to do the 20.5. Everything on this old plane is perfect and ready to go. She turned out to be quite a beautiful old girl. and it's time to take her for a test drive to see just what she can do. I've got a 3/4 inch piece of poplar that I drew some lines on and very rough cut them out on a bandsaw. I'm going to start with the convex planing. The best way I found to do this is to come in from both directions and not try to go all the way across all at once. Take a little bit more off with each stroke. Almost got all the saw marks off from the bandsaw. This side is smoothed up really good. I'm going to turn it around now and come in from the other side. There's a look at the first half. I took it all the way up to about here where you see the roughness start again. I've turned the board end for end and I'm coming in from the opposite side. Now we're getting down there. First half of the test is a success. It's time to flip the board over. Just like I did on the concave side, convex, I'm working one side at a time. This is the side that's coming across the ends of the open grain. She's doing a good job, but I'm getting a good bit of blade chatter coming up over the crown. I've turned the board end for end, still working on the convex. This is the last side. Still hearing that blade chatter. Sounding better. That's it. I'd say this one passed the test. And here's a look at the plane surfaces, both convex and concave. Turned out pretty good, no sanding required, of course. Here's the concave side. And there's the old 20.5 resting in her bed of shavings. During that test drive, there was noticeable chattering of the iron. I wasn't happy with that. After I cut the camera off, the thought popped into my head. I tightened the cap screw 1/4 turn and wouldn't you know it, no more chattering. The only notable detraction was the throat had a tendency to fill up with shavings. They got packed in there pretty hard, which could have also contributed to chattering if it wasn't feeding through the iron. All of those xylophone looking shavings right there were what was packed into the throat when I stopped. If I took the time to clean it out while I was going, I probably wouldn't have had a problem. I don't remember what wood I used when I tested my 113 a couple months ago, but I do remember that everything was smooth as silk. I don't remember any problems with the throat clogging up. I don't remember any chattering. But of course I had the lever cap tighter that time. And that's it for today. The old 20.5 is looking for somebody to adopt her into a new home. And for me, it's time to see what's next off the pile, but first, it's time for supper. Bye.